As you will see, this is a journey between Geneva, Belgrade, and back to your houses, because we are all about opening doors today, and back doors including. So we will start with a very quick background from Geneva on the international reactions to this FBI versus Apple case. Then we will give the floor to Vladimir Radunović, our e-diplomacy and cybersecurity programs director in Belgrade. And then back to Geneva, we will hear from Jovan Kurbalija, director of DiploFoundation and head of the GenevaInternetPlatform. And of course, from you, all throughout the seminar, but also in this Q&A format for more than 40 minutes today. So this is a unique opportunity. Please take the floor. Please feel free to ask your questions all throughout the webinar. As you know, I will be moderating today's session. My name is Roxana Radu. I am Internet Governance Associate at DiploFoundation. And I will be here to facilitate this interaction between the written text and the commentaries and the responses from our side. You know that on the 17th of February, there was a public letter sent by Tim Cook to his customers, to the Apple customers, to announce that his company would oppose a court order from the US to provide help for FBI to access data on an iPhone 5 device held by the now dead terrorist Syed Farouk, the San Bernardino shooter. Days after, the internet industry rallied behind Apple, and a number of companies also announced their own initiatives to strengthen security on their devices or on their services. At the same time, in Geneva, the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights urged the US authorities to proceed with a lot of caution because he believed this could set a precedent, and this could also have impact on human rights defenders and their work across the world in very sensitive contexts. This was also echoed, this approach to proceed with caution was also echoed in the report of the Special Rapporteur on Privacy released last week. So we have a number of high-level reactions to this case. Of course, we also have a number of statements from different CEOs of internet companies. But what is this case really about? What is at stake here? And for the technical details on this, we will turn now to Vlada and back to Geneva for a summary of issues we perceive as problematic here.
Thank you, Roxana. The particular case of Apple versus FBI or vice versa is just a kind of motivation to actually explore a wider area of encryption in context of security and privacy. So we will start with the Apple FBI, but it's no intention to focus only on that throughout the session. There is a lot of different aspects. Now, with purpose, I asked you to comment on what do you see here, which is actually an evidence. This is not only about this particular case. And some of the responses that I can see, I don't know if you can see also the responses, but I can read. What you said is you see data storage, a computer, a phone, and some words. A computer that offers the wealth of accumulated human knowledge in the palm in your hands. A personal assistant, GPS, a lot of sensitive information. So there was very few comments that it's actually a phone and just a phone, a tracking device, data storage, and so on. And that's what we are talking about. It's just much more than just a phone. Now, when it comes to this particular case, and we'll start with that when it comes to Apple versus FBI. So, in a nutshell, what this all is about is that what FBI is trying to find in the investigation is to try to see whether the shooters were connected in any way with the terrorists. In order to do that, they wanted to track their movements after and before the shooting, and of course their communications with the possible other terrorists around. So what they managed to do is they managed to get a huge pile of information about exact movements of the couple, including after the shooting and before they were shut down themselves. So they used basically tracking of the mobile phone towers. So they have exact movements of the couple after the shooting. What they miss is what they say is the 18 minutes during which, after the shooting, during which they know that the couple has been moving along the highway, but they don't know if they and stopping at certain points, and they know where, but they are not sure whether they have been communicating and meeting anyone in these places. They were not able to put up the whole puzzle, including with using the CCTV cameras that were available and so on. So they have a gap in putting the whole picture together and possibly making a link with terrorism or not. Now, one idea was to get into the phone of the shooters. Now, the problem with that is the iPhone, actually, some of you have probably seen that, has the security level that disables entrance into phone without entering the passcode, which is a number of digits, 4, 6 or more combination of digits. It's not such a big deal to break through number of digits. FBI could certainly do that with the so-called brute force, simply going through all the possible combinations of the digits and get into the phone. The problem is that Apple has a specific way, the new iOS operating systems 8 and beyond, is a specific additional security feature which says that if you miss, if you make an incorrect input of password in the first 3 times, then the next attempt you have to wait for 60 seconds or a minute. And then after another couple of attempts, you have to wait for 5 minutes and so on. So they need quite some time to get into that. And more importantly, if they miss it 10 times, the whole content of the device is going to be deleted. So they simply do not dare going into and exploring, testing the combinations and trying to enter the phone to get the data because they risk the loss of information. Now, what they specifically asked through the court to Apple was not for Apple to break the code. It was not for Apple to remove the whole security setting on the phone. It was to make it easier to simply remove these specific parts of security which limit the possibility of FBI to get in, which is specifically the time introduced between the attempts, and B, the limit of number of attempts before erasing the whole content. So if they would go beyond that with assistance of Apple, FBI would go on breaking the phone. So they don't request particularly Apple to break the phone or the encryption or to remove the encryption entirely. That's very important because when we talk about backdoors, and the title of this includes the backdoors, this isn't a backdoor. A backdoor would be a separate key that FBI or anyone else could have, as even if you have your own password, they could have a, let's say, a master key, so they could get into the phone without knowing your password or having a need to break into the phone. This is different. Now, what they specifically requested Apple to do is to help them bypass this security level, which means, of course, diminishing the level of security of the phone. There is a way to do that. The way to do that is because they hold the phone in their hands. The way to do that is actually to boot the phone and use some kind of a firmware upgrade. This is a piece of code. This piece of code in the previous versions of Apple could have been written by FBI. In the new ones, there is additional security which requires that Apple signs all the pieces of software that are going to get into iPhone in order for that to work. So that means that Apple will need to write this piece of code. This kind of a patch into the whole system, and then plug it into the phone, boot the phone, and that way reduce the level of security. The problem is, Apple would need to write such a code. That means they would need to rewrite the operating system that they currently have, with reducing the level of security for this particular example. They would need to hand the code to FBI so that FBI can actually put it in the phone and then break it the way they know. Or, as the court order said, even this is not the only option. The court order also said if Apple is afraid to give out this piece of code to FBI, all of that can be done in the Apple offices, with the FBI accessing the phone remotely in order to try to break it. That's a technical aspect. Now the question is when we are talking about the single phone, and what the worry of the Apple is that once everyone knows that there is a code, piece of code, that doesn't mean that code will necessarily impact all the other phones. No, it won't. It will possibly impact this one. But their worry is that once everyone knows that there is a piece of software which bypasses the security level of iPhone, and that's basically their comparative advantage on market, giving this additional encryption level to their customers, FBI and law enforcement agencies would definitely revert again back in many times in any case they might need to ask for this help from Apple. So in a nutshell, it will be clear that the encryption there is a way out. So practically we would get a way towards a backdoor, even though it's not a backdoor itself. And secondly, what they're worried about, but we are going to touch upon that later on, is the politics. If other countries see that the US can order Apple to diminish the level of security of their products, what would stop Russia, China, or anyone else to ask the same thing? And we have been seeing that with BlackBerry and other devices, Google and so on in many countries. And lastly, that would possibly lead, what they say, to a precedent that judicial order can actually require producers of technology to provide specific level of security for devices, possibly for specific states, even within US. So California would have one, New York would have the other, and so on. That is something, and certainly across the world, that is the risk of what Apple sees. And to close this part on technology aspects, one thing to think about is what was actually FBI looking for at the phone. We don't know. This is a part of the investigation, so we don't know exactly what they were looking at. But most likely they were looking at the communication patterns or the communication records between the couple or the owner of the phone and possible third parties. The communication that is done either voice, SMS, Viber, WhatsApp, Facebook, whatever. All of them now actually are IP traffic. All of them, or most of them, are in some way cached within the servers of the companies that offer the service. Let's say if it is Facebook, the records of communication stay on Facebook. So if they're looking for that, they don't need to get into the phone. They can actually get to Apple and request the access to personal data of the user. And Apple and Facebook would do that. Apple in their response said, we are happy to help with everything. We even gave the backup of data that were on phone, but unfortunately the backup was too old. There was nothing that they were looking at. There might be a possibility that FBI is looking also for something more than communication patterns that could have been stored on the phone, which is definitely the only way to access that is accessing the phone. To conclude, there are some speculations on that this particular case is actually used by FBI and security sector to make a precedent, even though it might not have been necessary for FBI to really get into the phone. They already got a lot of information about the shooting in the couple through digital forensics, even without getting into the phone. One more thing, and I'm not sure if Jovan might cover it later on, but just moving to a next slide as well. We did within our data analysis team a semantic analysis of a number of relevant media reports in the period of February to March. 193 media reports from online media. And here are some of the results. There was a lot of sentiments and emotions around this, and you have quite a polarized public opinion, many of them being fully on the side of Apple, many of them being fully on the side of FBI. But we try to link these emotions and positions with the specific topics related to security and internet governance in general, using the data model that we have. And you can see, for instance, that the FBI in this media coverage is mostly related, or the correlation is closest to the terms or the fields of cybersecurity, critical infrastructure, and cybercrime, and Apple is closest to freedom of expression, content policy, and intermediaries. I leave it in the second part of discussion to discuss also philosophical and society aspects of this polarization of understanding or perception of FBI and Apple. And lastly, there is a lot of dimensions that we want to touch upon in this discussion today. Technology behind, under the bonnet, as we would say, we touched upon a little bit on that, but we can touch more on encryption in general and how it works and why do we need it if we need it and so on. Prosecution and digital forensics aspects, so what is the law enforcement looking for and how can they get actually the data they need. Legal aspects, what is the legal background, political consequences, as we said, geopolitical included, and philosophical context, and I'm sure you will reflect more on that in sense of including the new social contract and the liability and responsibility of different authorities and actors in the world. Roxana, I'll stop here and passing the floor back to you, and of course we'll go back with questions. I'm sure there will be many. Thanks. Roxana, seems like the microphone is your microphone is off, so try to unmute it. Okay, it should be okay now. Yep, thanks.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Vladam. We see we have a number of comments and questions coming in already. So let me go quickly through that. Are there ways to bypass the time lock and brute force the password? The answer is a little bit more complicated because the PIN code has to be introduced manually. So even if you find a way to bypass the time lock, you cannot have a supercomputer run different combinations of passwords. You will have to type it in manually each time. And a couple of questions and comments pointing to whether this is a different type of battle. Is this only about encryption, or is it about something else like reputation? Is Apple trying to get back his reputation for the post-Snowden revelations? Is this more about societal consequences? What are the political implications? And maybe this is a good time to bring in Jovan on this. I can tell you that we had very intense discussions in the Geneva office on this, even this morning. So Jovan, do you want to give us a quick reflection on the societal impact of this case?
Sure. Thank you. Thank you, Roxana. I guess you can hear me now well, because we had some problems. Vlad outlined the main conceptual issues and key questions, but ultimately the question for me is if this device, I have the new, as you can see, iPhone, should be unbreakable. This is the ultimate question, and does it mean that nobody can break and get into this iPhone? This question, there are many analog aspects in discussion on Apple versus FBI case, and we will see a few reflections, few visual reflections in a few minutes. Arvin will upload them. But ultimately, when you remove those layers, technical layers, contextual layers, the risk that other governments can misuse this possibility, bit of hypothetical arguments, you come at the core issue, and this is issue of the social contract. If ultimately Apple should be allowed to create device that should be unbreakable. Should we as a society go into that direction? As you can see, this is a question to the large extent of internet social contract. And we have to move from the, I would say, technicalities, which are important, to that ultimate issue. And this is rather not analog issue. It is digital, yes or no. If the answer is yes, that devices should be breakable, should be somehow accessible, then we have to see under what condition it should be done. What is the due process? What are the check and balances? What is the role of the courts and other details? And this is ultimately the most important issue. If the answer is no, these devices should be unbreakable, then this is the informed decision that society as a whole will take with the whole risks. And that's the key issue. Arguments of security and privacy currently are very strong that there is very little impact of mass surveillance or prevention of the terrorist attacks. And we are hearing it from the United States, including NSA and the other players. Therefore, that argument weakens a bit, strengthens the argument that we should make unbreakable device. But it goes beyond that. It is the matter of principle and matter ultimately of the social contract, which Arvin just displayed on the screen. What triggered this reflection and what Roxana mentioned, quite intensive debate in our office and among our colleagues, is the reply from the US Department of Justice to the court, their sort of input in the current discussion. And if you read it carefully, you can find quite strong arguments for the FBI's request. And as you can see, it goes like this. The court's order is modest. It applies to a single iPhone, and it allows Apple to decide the least burdensome means of complying. As Apple well knows, the order does not compel to unlock other iPhones or to give the government a universal master key or backdoor. Vlada just discussed it, how it could be done in the other way. I will continue. It is a narrow targeted order that will produce a narrow targeted piece of software capable of running on just one iPhone. This is important. In the security of Apple's corporate headquarters. That iPhone belongs to the county of San Bernardino, which has consented to its being searched. Therefore, owner is allowed to be searched. The phone was used by the now dead terrorist Syed Rizwan Farouk, who also consented to its being searched as a part of his employment agreement with the county. In short, the order invades no one's privacy and raises no Fourth Amendment concerns. Now, when you read this text, you find quite a strong case. You have on more or less all major points. And I'm now preparing blog post asking if Apple pick up the best case to fight for the stronger privacy, which is basically shared concern of many of us. In this case, if you analyze US Department of Justice response, they have quite a strong points on all lines, including the question of backdoor, consent, ownership, etc., etc. Therefore, that led towards quite intensive discussion within Diplo to see, because we noticed that there is in media, there is a strong pro-Apple bias. And we went to the original documents and analyzed them and tried to see what is the factual basis. And in that search for social contract, we basically came to triangle, which I guess most of you have already seen, between us, users, state, and business. And in this triangle, a lot of the dynamics will be happening. And therefore, what we have is discussion on the bottom of this triangle, relation between state and business, which is to the large sense influenced by interplay, how we as the users give the data to internet businesses, they sell it to the vendors, and for them, for internet businesses, link between trust between internet industry and users is extremely important. That led some commentators to argue, and I can see today as well, that for Apple, this is also the case of regaining trust and strengthening their business model, basically strengthening this triangle in this case. And ultimately, it leads to this interplay between cybersecurity, business, and human rights. But what is the major point in this discussion for the new social contract? It came also during the last week conference, South by Southwest conference in Texas, when President Obama made the following statement. After something really bad happens, the politics of this will swing. He refers to the encryption. and it will become sloppy and rushed, and it will go through Congress in ways that are dangerous and not thought through. Therefore, his basically statement is, hey guys, in this triangle, we are still a government, we still rule the social and legal relations on particular territory. Let us make reasonable contract which will make this device breakable in some circumstances, but the risk that of pushing it too strong to unbreakable extreme could provoke the strong reaction of the government. It was in a way the warning sign, but we are ultimately back to the discussion about new internet social contract. That was the main point, Vlad and colleagues, to zoom out and to put this question into perspective. We have to make some tough and difficult decisions. When I say we, it refers to the United States, to societies worldwide. And these decisions should be informed. They shouldn't be sort of camouflaged by layers of technicalities discussion. These issues cannot be solved on technical level. They have to be solved by answering the question, two questions. Should devices be breakable or not, A, and B, if they should be breakable, under what condition it should be the case. Over to you.
Thank you. Vlada, reflections from Belgrade?
Yeah, a quick one, or rather two. One is with relation to the court order, where they, and that's usually not what is known or what is disclosed too much, is that Apple actually already helped getting the backup of the whole phone. So the phone can be set to do a backup, a regular backup, to the iPhone cloud. For the time being, the iPhone cloud or the Apple cloud is not encrypted. The content is not encrypted in the cloud, or at least can be decrypted from the Apple side. So they already provided the content of the backup to the FBI and to the law enforcement agencies. So there was a big cooperation from the Apple side. Now, I'm not defending Apple. I'm just trying to bring all the aspects. There was a big step forward in what Apple would usually do, and all of them would usually do, and Facebook, Google, and the others in many cases, or in most of the cases, cooperated with law enforcement in US by providing the data they can provide. The problem here was that the backup was switched off at some point, and so they don't have the latest data they are looking at were not backed up. So there is no backup of that, so they need to go into the phone. That's what I say. The point of that is there was already a standard cooperation of what Apple and the others do with FBI. Now this time the court order went on asking something more than what was usually done. And before that there was a court order in Brooklyn, if I'm not wrong, that was last October, for a similar case where there was an attempt to get in the phone of the drug dealer by the FBI. And the judge, now that's more into legal aspects, the lawyers and Jovan would know it better, for the first time actually asked Apple whether they can help. And that's where the precedent was made that Apple has a choice, or any one of them has a choice to say, well, let's see whether we can do it. Now, in this particular case, they said we did everything we could. And you can see that in the comments from Apple. We did everything we could and everything we usually do. But this goes beyond the red line that can destroy the whole trust in, of course, in their industry, but as well that can move the boundaries of what can be requested from the corporate sector, not only by the US government, but by all the governments around the world if it's done once. And one more short, quick comment on the social contract part. When there was a support from Google, Facebook, and the others to the Apple response, there was a tweet by Snowden, who actually said something, I'm going to retell it, that I can't remember precisely, but it was something like, the problem is that the FBI and the secret or the security sector made it so that people look for privacy and protection of privacy in Apple's hand rather than from their own security services. So that's a kind of a shift, that probably society shift, that we should address in this political philosophical component of our discussion. Back to you.
Thank you, Vlada. It seems we still have very small technical issues here. A question that came from Trevor, regardless of the outcome of this case, what would stop other governments from attempting a similar discussion in their jurisdictions or attending to mandate legislation of a similar type? And here I can already bring in the example of France that is examining this right now. France will not allow operators to make devices that cannot be accessible. So this is a discussion that is underreported in the media, but it is already happening. We can see some of this happening in Europe already.
Roxana, maybe a quick comment on that.
Vlada, we can't hear you.
It should be okay now. I hope so. You can hear me?
We cannot hear you, Vlada.
Let me see. Okay. It might be the problem on your side. It seems like the group can hear me, but okay. So a quick one is that the encryption introduced by the producers of the technology is something that in one side of the security discussion goes under security by design. And there is a huge community, including security community, which cybersecurity community, network security community, which requests or fights for, strongly opts for security by design in order to raise the level of security of our devices by design, so that we have less flaws, and that includes to some extent the high level of security of our data and communication, which includes encryption. But there is another aspect, is that whether or not the technology company or producers of phones or equipment would do security by design, it's not going to change the fact that the open source and open communities are building up strong encryption algorithms, which any one of us already now can use, install and use. There we go into the question, where is the line of prohibiting encryption, and whether it's better to leave it to the bigger companies to provide encryption rather than leaving it to users to pick up their own favorable algorithms online and so on, which might be much less controllable by the security sector than if they work with producers and kind of leave this trust of users, since the trust is not in security sector anymore, leave it at least on the level of big producers rather than on totally uncontrollable open community online. I'm not opting for that. I'm just saying those are the options. Many would say that, in fact, what we need and what the merit of the internet is this openness, and the fact that there is no government that can tell us or push us not to use encryption. We can always do another piece of software ourselves and do the encryption. That's another dilemma, which is technologically, politically, philosophical. We need your microphone again back.
Yes. Now it's
okay. Good.
Back to it. So when we talk about the openness of the internet, we also talk about the openness of policy making, and should this be a public discussion? Should this actually draw on broader values that we put forward nowadays, transparency, accountability, and so on? And some of the questions referred here to this single case. Is this just about that one iPhone being unlocked, or is it about creating a policy around how devices can be accessed? And should there be some form of multi-stakeholder participation in this type of decision making?
Well, I think Jovan is better placed to respond to that.
We have an interesting exchange with Emmanuel and a few colleagues, and I think you're pointing to the key issue. there is this hypothetical situation if one iPhone is unlocked, potentially all iPhones will be unlocked, even with the idea that one phone can be unlocked. And this is how I started this reflection philosophical aspect. Should we make this iPhone unbreakable? If we as a society make the decision, that's fine. And then even that one iPhone shouldn't be unlocked. If we make the decision that in some occasions there should be access to the iPhone, then we shift from technical issues to legal and procedural issues. And then we had from CIS, Christian and a few other colleagues, Krunoslav, we have this reflections on the question, should we, how to make this process transparent, reliable, how to include check and balances. And there was CIS's interesting idea to have it multi-stakeholder. It means to have more eyes watching the process and reducing the misuse of the process. But the ultimate first question is it a technical issue and it will be unbreakable, or should we make it accessible in certain circumstances? And then the risk is that when we open the door, we have really to keep it carefully guarded. It means with transparency, check and balances, and other procedural issues. But this is in probably the core question in this discussion. Okay, then we have the few questions. Shall I just quickly read? One discussion is important. Okay, Krunoslav make the bit longish comment. Well, it is not a problem of unbreakable phone because this one is breakable, but in the request to make phone protection more weaker. Krunoslav, is it breakable if Apple argues that it's not breakable? It's good question. They basically argue that they cannot break it. They cannot access it. As it said, encryption is a good thing, a necessary thing. Suvel will argue we have been using it in our products over a decade. As attack on our customer data becomes increasingly sophisticated, the tools we use to defend against them must get stronger too. This is the customer argument, important for the internet business. Weakening encryption will only hurt consumers and other well-meaning users who rely on companies like Apple to protect personal information, so on. Christiane also arguments by Apple, if they develop the key to break the encryption, the employees that work on this would be exposed to undue risk. This is one, Christiane, one of the arguments which wasn't very well developed, but we can explore it in the follow-up. There was also argument of the slavery work of the employers. Emmanuel, if you provide an unlocking tool, the only restriction is the willingness of the authorities to use the tool. This is a really good question. Is it the only protection, or there could be some other protection? Stefano Baldi, the best guarantee to keep it technically unbreakable. Stefano is strongly on the view on making it unbreakable at all. Stefano, the question would be what in really justifiable security circumstances where the stake is very high, including survival of humanity in the case of potential nuclear attack. Emmanuel, a reminder, the same authorities have entire population children under surveillance. Now, Emmanuel, here we have some good news. The reason why FBI is making it so public and basically complaining that they can do surveillance is that they are not as powerful as we think, at least when it comes to this case. Therefore, it is a good news and good basis for a possible compromise, because nobody is now powerful enough to impose their will on the others. State, well, ultimately can do it by using the physical power. It has monopoly of physical power, but it's unthinkable in these circumstances. Businesses have quite a lot of power, financial and security, but they are still checked by states. And we as users have some power. Vlada is trying to comment something. Okay, go ahead, Vlada.
Yeah, no, a quick one. One is a tip, since I know Krunoslav from our cybersecurity course. Krunoslav is actually from the security community, so it's interesting to hear this for me, this position, even though it's not official, of course. What I found interesting was the comment whether they can unlock or unlock. It's not about unlocking; it's about reducing the level of security, and that's what Apple can do. But my bigger, as I mentioned, my bigger concern is that this whole discussion is a bit misleading, because it's, even if we allow Apple and the others not to produce not to make the products which are unbreakable, there are online algorithms and there will be software and everything that we as users can always use, and there is no way to stop the community to produce them. There are mathematical algorithms that can always be made, and the main question is whether we want to give this trust. Since we don't have the trust in security sector, do we want to at least give it to Apple, Google and the others, and then have some cooperation between security sectors and them, or we want to completely leave it to end users to use any kind of encryption software they want, because you can't ban it, and then we definitely have unbreakable communications. I'm just not sure what it is. And there was a good comment, and I reflected back maybe to you, Jovan, from Milan, who said, what if the FSB, the Russian service, asks the same patch from the FBI? That is a geopolitical question, but what happens then? Can we make sure that this is not going to leak and that the other service is not going to have it? That's also kind of a geopolitical question.
For these technical difficulties, the answer is rather the answer is rather simple. FSB can ask, as FBI is asking on the US territory, FSB can ask, I guess, on the Russian territory or any other authority. This is the short answer. Now the questions are, would we have such in-depth discussion as we have now in the United States, and what are the other tools and means? There is one question which was underlying in a few comments and in your Vlada comments, and I asked it a few days ago when I attended one panel discussion on the same issue. In the United States, one of the arguments for the ban of the use of the weapons is against for the use of the weapons is that people should have a possibility for self-defense. Now, the argument of the cyber anarchist or cyber libertarian community or cyber punk community is that cyber protection should be used for self-defense from the authorities, and this is legitimate argument, like in guns control discussion in the United States. But it opens also the question that if we move the discussion from the legal, principle, political decisions that we as a society should make to self-defense or self-help level, are we exposing us to certain risks? Because the technology that could be used today to protect us could backfire tomorrow and could be used to attack us. We saw it in the Stuxnet case, that the similar technology was later on used against some other targets. It is always the self-help approach is always tricky approach, because it can backfire. This is another issue. As you can see, I'm asking more questions than the answer that I'm providing. The reason why we are asking more questions is that we notice the discussion around this case has been rather simplified. What answers we are going to provide, unbreakable device, self-help, are up to us as a society to do it. But discussion is much more important than it is presented currently in the media. Over to you.
Maybe just to add to that complexity, let's ask another question. What does that mean for the Internet of Things? Any replies from our technical in-house expert?
Well, it's not no different from this. I mean, it just raises the complexity that all of our gadgets around us will start communicating with each other. So when it comes to encryption, there are, let's say, two major levels of encryption. One is the communication level, so that no one it's basically putting the message in an envelope. So between the 2 points of travel, no one can interfere with that. That's what exists all around. The other one is encrypting the storage. So once you get the letter, you read it, but you keep it in an envelope. You don't keep it in an open file so that everyone can see it. For the time being, they're emerging, or most of the software that works on encrypting the communication between the points. But more and more, the cloud servers, the cloud operators, and the others are actually encrypting the content itself. So even the content won't be visible. So I think it goes, this kind of encryption market basically is growing, and we see more and more applications for protected communications and so on, and user applications. When it comes to Internet of Things, I'm sure it's going to be similar. It will be a kind of an upgrade of security. There was one good question, one good reflection from Nicholas, I think, yes, from Nicholas, who said that with this dilemma, whether we want breakable technology or whether we want unbreakable but secured by the corporate sector, or we want unbreakable but secured by the end users. If we go into the last one, secured by the end users, then we're probably not going to have the equal level of security, because the tech-savvy people, which might be mostly the perpetrators, even the terrorists more and more, as we see with ISIS, they might have an advantage because they know better levels of securing and breaking the security. But if the corporate sector sets the kind of a security by design, then we might all have at least the minimum of security. Now, there is another dilemma which is discussed again on a more philosophical level, is this what some authors called it feudalization of cyberspace and our relations, which is that we are trusting too much now, not to the governments, but rather to the corporate sector. Whether that's good or not, that's linked but not the same dilemma. Whether that means that the oligopolies like Apple, Google, and the others are going to control us more and more, and we give trust to them instead of to ourselves or to government. And that's maybe another triangle to write or to draw.
Here are the few comments. I can see the debate is becoming really lively. That's great. That's the major purpose. I can tell you, in Diplo we have very heated debate with Vlada, Ginger, Emanuele, I, Stephanie, and other colleagues, and that's really this issue has become a really important issue. We have very few answers, and I think there was an interesting comment from Greg, who said that privacy, like all other human rights, are not absolute rights, and it's an interesting also dilemma. We don't have absolute human rights; they're always influenced by certain context. That should be kept in mind, and therefore we have this. It's good, Vlada, that you told me that our colleague from the region, Krunoslav, is from security community. It's also really interesting aspect that we have colleagues from the security community arguing for, which is on the first glance against security. That's a very simplified view, therefore more for privacy protection. Really, we marshaled extremely good comments in discussion. And as I think Michelle indicated, it's for discussion for the whole semester. And I'm sure that we'll be discussing it over the next few months, if not years. This issue is not going to go away because it's so crucial for the modern society. And in the few comments, key question from Nicholas, difficult to get the answer. Can law enforcement agency do their work without breaking into encryption communication through metadata digital forensic? Surely reading encrypted communication makes them their job easier, but it is necessary. It should be necessary and proportional. Definitely, Nicholas. The statistics so far shows that at least available statistics from the commission which supervised NSA show that there was very little insights into breaking the terrorist plots, for example, by access to metadata by NSA. It's a bit better on the surveillance of communication, but the impact is really limited. there is argument that the governments have to do something when they have a problem, and the easiest way is to open this issue of encryption. Therefore, the argument that the less encryption is a solution for security is a bit questionable and shaky. All statistics currently showing that it is not the case. Then we have the question by Francisca, unbreakable phone. Shouldn't we ask, should there be a right to an unbreakable phone? Can privacy only be ensured if you have an unbreakable phone? Or should the user just be aware that no information on their ordinary iPhone and other commercial use devices are 100% secure privately? This is a good question, Francisca. Is it a question for us as a users? Then we say, okay, I want unbreakable phone. Or is it a question for society as a whole, which will tell Apple, no, you cannot make unbreakable phone? That's an interesting, well, let's say philosophical question. Herman, great to hear from you. Well, that's from our neighbor here from human rights community. Herman says, there are absolute human rights. Freedom of opinion is absolute. The prohibition of torture is absolute. Privacy may accept interference under certain conditions. Thank you, Herman, for this correction. Then we have Davi, sorry, but I have a problem. I cannot hear anything. My God, we cannot solve this problem now. Lombard, first name, I cannot see. Herman, think about the right to life. It should be the most absolute right, but it is not always respected. Well, there is a question of, we can go into discussion of euthanasia and other issues. Krunoslav Perkovic, privacy has nothing with the human rights. Privacy is solely mine, and nobody has the right to limit it or decide what is or what is not. But with human rights, we are limited with the overall level of human rights put in the constitutions or laws. Okay. Vlad wants to, now, Vlad, it's always complex when you want to talk because we have to mute the mic.
You have probably the speakers aside and so on. 2 points. One is regarding what Nicholas mentioned and you raised is to what extent the law enforcement and prosecution has advantage in using. I bumped on the same kind of statistics as you mentioned, is that they didn't really get such a value from all of surveillance and stuff. They got more value actually from metadata, which is making the graphs of connecting people and who's communicating with who, which is the metadata, rather than from the content of communications. And there were a couple of papers which actually outlined that law enforcement do have a lot more tools to use now when it comes to digital forensics. And we had a good webinar yesterday within the course on cybersecurity for Southeastern Europe discussing crime. And Tatiana Tropina, our colleague, also mentioned that there is almost no crime anymore that you can go without digital forensics. So they need something where there is many more tools from the digital world to do forensics. So that's a good dilemma. But I want to bring back my own kind of basic dilemma in all of that is when it comes to trust. Is that now we are debating whether we should give more trust to the companies and to what extent, but we don't examine why have we lost the trust in our own security services. And that is, for me, the key question. That I'm back to what Snowden said is FBI or the whole security community is their responsibility why we as users turned to believing Apple to protect our privacy and security rather than security system that we pay. So for me, that's the key question, rather than whether Apple should be able to do it. It shouldn't be. We have the system, but we don't trust it anymore for some reasons.
The answer is probably what Reagan once said when they asked him if he trusts, I think, Soviet Union. Trust but verify. Trust is important. And there are some societies which have the high level of trust. I was last week in Malta, and I was thinking why Malta and Switzerland are so successful societies. You can see Maltese ministers and walking on the streets of Valletta. You can see Swiss president taking the train to go back home. And as you know, Vlada, in the Balkans, you cannot live from the people with special security protection going through the streets of Belgrade and I guess other cities. And this is also the question of how close the political elite and state is to the ordinary citizens. In Malta and Switzerland, people have a trust in their government. Government is delivering something in the social contract. That's probably ultimately the question, which cannot be solved with the tricks, with shortcuts before elections or the other issue. It requires substantive long-term investment. Okay. We have now I'm sure the discussion will continue. We'll try to observe 1 hour sort of a time frame, but with Roxana's permission, I'll just indicate one event which we will host on 25th of April. The event will discuss interplay between technological solution and digital policy. And we'll have a few fathers of the internet and including Louis Pouzan. We'll have people from ETH presenting the new Sion system, which could deal with the issue with the net neutrality. You'll have Phil Zimmerman, the father of the open source crypto protection. It will be an interesting event addressing these issues. To what extent technological solution could provide answer to the policy and legal dilemmas. 25th of April. In the meantime, we'll continue with blog posts and discussion following this interesting debate which is happening now, mainly in the United States, but it is now broadening to other countries because it is one of the core issues of the modern society.
And I will also take this opportunity to remind you that this discussion will also be addressed in our summary of the developments, which happens every Tuesday, last Tuesday of the month. This is going to be on the 29th from 1 to 2 o'clock European time, 12 GMT. So please stay with us, come to join us for this event. We will be summarizing everything that is happening in key areas of digital policy for the past month. And of course, encryption will be high on the agenda. Thank you all for your participation today. We were very pleased to see so much interaction in the online chat room and also to hear from you in the next days. If you have ideas on this, if you would like to publish something on this, react to some of the blog posts that we might provide in the next days, please feel free to do so and let's stay in touch on this. Thank you, Vlada, for your presentation and thank you all. Goodbye. Thanks, from Geneva.
Bye-bye.
And bye from Belgrade from the entire team.